All right, guys, here we are for the recap of the finale of Survivor Winners at War. Got the whole group here. I did invite my friend Crystal Millicon because I wanted to bring in the female perspective on the show. Hopefully she'll join us in a little bit. I know she's super busy, but here with Scott Porter, RJ Ochoa, Kenneth Arthur, and myself, Tug Coker, everyone battling for the number one Survivor analyst in the world. Kenneth is number one, but who knows? Who knows after today?
I'm working hard to get rid of that title. I'm working hard to get rid of that title.
So much to cover from last night. So I think what we'll just start with is we'll start with the thoughts on our winner, and then we'll do kind of a breakdown on some of the minor pieces that happened last night. And let's start with RJ. Thoughts on Tony for you? Thoughts on Tony being the winner last night?
So this is a season that I think it had to have the right winner, right? Like this is one of those you want to look back and it's got to be like the best winner of all time. It has to have that feel like to justify the time we spent watching it and the time we spent hyping and the time we spent talking about it. And Tony was that guy. It was Pat Mahomes winning the Super Bowl. Like the great players need to win the titles, and Tony had the best performance all season. And I was a little worried, especially watching it. And maybe this is giving away my take on something, but I love Natalie, and I think that she played the absolute best game possible given the hand she was dealt. But I would have been bothered every night for the rest of my life going to sleep if this particular season had a winner that came from the Edge of Extinction. So for Tony to win it the way he did, to have all the immunity wins, to have the spy shack or spy nest and everything, like it just checks off all the cliches, which makes it sound bad, but it's all the necessary requirements. It's the classic Survivor win, and so I'm pretty thrilled and I'm pretty at peace.
Scott, what do you think? I was following you closely last night on Twitter. After I didn't want any spoilers, you know what I mean? I told it, so I had to read yours after the fact, but you definitely had some thoughts. So what do you think about Tony winning?
Yeah, man, I'm a king at not getting spoiled, but still like just putting my thoughts out into the world.
Very impressive. It really was.
You just have to put your timeline at a spot where you can tweet and then not update it, just constantly hit that little plus button.
Yeah.
And of course, two guys East Coast were like, try to ruin it for me. I'm like, what is going on? But I did not get spoiled. But I think Survivor did a great job of making sure we understood why Sarah should win if Sarah would have made it. I think we had three people who had very strong cases and resumes of their own. I would have been fine with Sarah winning actually this season. Tony played the perfect season, but we've seen someone play the perfect season and make the one wrong move and really, show the embodiment of Survivor, how you've got to be on guard 24/7. Every minute you're on that beach. And I think Natalie would have been a fine winner. I think I, like RJ, would have been a little bit bummed that someone came back from the Edge because we keep on saying the hand she was dealt. Well, the hand you were dealt was getting yourself voted out on the first night. Now, whatever reason that was, because you weren't part of the majority alliance on day one, it doesn't mean that you still didn't do something to get yourself on the edge. It's not like the game was like, okay, Natalie, so we're going to put you all out there except you. We're going to put you on edge. No, the tribe did that, right? So, like, I like RJ would have been a little bit bummed, but I thought Sarah was very valiant last night. I thought you really started to understand why she should have won if she would have made it through instead of Tony. People walked up to her and gave her information. Natalie, because she thought she was the only person she could go to, told her that she had an idol. I mean, Sarah has this approachability that maybe Tony didn't have like at all times, and Sarah was that one little element that he needed. But I thought the king was crowned as he properly should have been, and I am stoked with the way it all wrapped up.
Yeah, I want to circle back to Sarah. I think it was a great storyline for the night last night. So I want to come back to not only talk about what she represented, but also some of the moves that I think she could have made in retrospect if we were going to play the rest of her like arc out. But now we got to turn to Kenneth, who we all wrote an 8,000 word piece on who should win Survivor. He said Tony had no chance of winning.
Not who should.
Who will win? He said, I think well, I'll let you, I won't put words in your mouth.
Thanks.
I know that after rewatching the season, we kind of thought Tony had a real shot. To you feeling like Tony had no shot. So excited to hear what you had to say have to say about last night's performance by Tony and Tony winning?
Yeah, clearly I do a pretty good job myself of putting words in my mouth. So I'll, I think that my big mistake was rewatching the season. Very clearly, I really was like, oh, I'm just kind of curious. I'm going to sit down. I really think Tony is playing one of the best seasons of all time. I like Sarah too. Let me sit down and rewatch this whole thing and take notes and these last 5 people and see what the resume is. So I did that and I jammed it in and I was taking notes. And I honestly think that based on the TV show, Sarah played the best game up till episode like 9 or 10. She was so much more cool, calm, and collected. There's a forgettable moments, maybe not forgettable, but there are moments that I forgot early on in the season where Tony is erratic, where Tony is playing like game changers, and he could get himself voted out. He was one of the first people mentioned in the show as a target, and Sarah was not like, I just thought Sarah played a great job up to that point. And then, so I was like, oh, I think Sarah might actually be in the lead. And also, I'm interested in the way that they're talking about Sarah as opposed to the way they're talking about Tony, because the way that they were talking, they were both doing the moves together, but Tony was like the one that had to make the promise that he would go back on kind of, and Sarah sort of felt like, I'm here, and I think that's one way to win the game is to be like a part of every decision and they're just not the bad guy about that, So I definitely thought that up to that point. And then Tony started getting on this roll and I was like, it's not necessarily too little too late, but to me, it was just like, oh, just the way that the show looked edited to me was that Tony was going to be like the 2007 Patriots. And it really happened, he's 17-0, 18-0. And it's just like, if he loses that fire challenge, then that's it, then his game is over. And I thought like, okay, maybe this is it, because I really thought that even as I was watching the finale, Tony was building an even stronger and stronger case. And I was like, man, like Tony really should win. I don't think he's not going to, but he should. He's just crushing it. And then he did. And I just thought that it should have been someone from Cops or Us. And as far as, just to quickly interject on the Natalie, I think RJ was totally right. She did everything she could. It was the most perfect Edge performance ever. She did everything she could. The whole thing.
She missed one thing.
Right. Well, that's right. Yeah, exactly. But like everything else. And she got 4 votes, which is great. She should have never been in there. That's what kind of bums me out. I would have been bummed if she won, and I would have been nice to see Sarah or somebody else sitting there to get a closer vote, to get a more of a thing.
Or Michelle
in the tribal. So yeah, I mean, I would have. It's nothing against Natalie. That was just the way that the game itself, all the fire tokens, none of that stuff played a factor at all, other than making for great television, putting Tony in situations to make moves and stuff like that. But anyway, that was kind of where I was at. I would have liked to have seen maybe a stronger person in the final 3 with Tony.
I don't disagree. I think Natalie, we all thought Natalie was a threat, and she got 4 votes, to be, challenging Tony. But we talk about the record Tony has. He had 0 votes on him all season as a big
It's amazing.
threat. We saw the odds yesterday come out, 50-1. To win, the longest odds in the game.
I mean, I had picked Tony in the draft. It was my last pick or whatever.
Tony was like I think he was 11 after the post-merge draft. He was the number 11 pick. Like even after what we'd seen, we just did not believe in this guy. He gets the adversity challenges against him. He doesn't get tokens given to him. He's got to go out and find them. He makes fire, and he also gets the added threat. Like I thought he made a really nice point in the challenge of saying, or in the final travel, saying, Natalie comes in and tells everyone I'm the biggest target. So I gotta beat that, and I get no one to refute that. So like that's another thing that's thrown at him, and he still was able to win that, to beat that. Totally impressive performance last night.
I want to clear up
Yeah.
I'm saying that Natalie missed one thing. And it's not that she got voted off. She should have taken Tony out herself.
Yeah, that's why I was like the Boston Rob comment.
That's the one thing, right? She does that thing, I think you have a really close vote between her and Sarah.
Yeah.
I don't think Michelle ever stood a chance. And I think this season I got lucky because I don't watch edits or put too much into it. And I think odds makers have a tendency as the season's going along to try and watch the edits. I think Survivor made a really strong case for each of the people that could have been in the final. I think the edits really kind of told us who was going to be in the final three, Sarah and Michelle. I think definitely we could have taken that from watching their edits. But Tony was just too perfect. And I think they had to prop some people up. And I think that's why they did what they did. Anyway, sorry.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I think, well, let's talk about what I'd like to do now is sort of just kind of do a quick recap of what happened in the show, because a lot happened. RJ and Kenneth and I were talking before you jumped on, that there was a lot of stuff so full that it wasn't even a reunion special, just one question asked. So just to recap the night, we start right off with Edge of Extinction. That's the challenge. And we see for the first time what the advantages of the tokens give someone. And so the certain people had advantages. Natalie, among the most among everyone, got to skip basically a third of the challenge, and she needed all this. She needed all those advantages to even have a chance. So ultimately, she does win. Wendell makes a strong showing in there. And we do a nice sort of – did it feel like to you guys, RJ, did it feel like to you that we were saying goodbye to some of these contestants? And what were your feelings as we were doing a sort of reminiscing with the players on their experience with Survivor and Edge?
So one of my favorite players of all time is Kim, and some of that is that I live in San Antonio, and Kim's got, some ties to this area. And so, we're really proud of her here. And she addressed something that I think, like, we all tend to put ourselves in those shoes. If it were me, I would be thinking this. And I've always thought if I won, I would not want to go back and blemish the record. I wouldn't want, especially Kim won in this grandstanding way. She was this person that was never a threat, et cetera. So if you go back and you get eliminated or whatever, you lose. Suddenly there's a chink in your armor. And I thought it was really awesome how vulnerable she was, and to kind of start off the conversation that way, and then hear from Tyson and talk about, I thought that was really reflective. And it was, I think, the necessary conversation for season 40 and all these. I thought, Jeff just does such a masterful job of kind of asking the questions that I think are always on our minds, and noting how we've watched, he said we've watched these people play this game. We follow them on social media. You get to, in a weird way, bond with them. And so it was emotional in that way. It kind of felt like, it didn't feel like high school graduation, but it felt like the last week of class. You know what I mean? Like your last fourth period. You know what I mean? Like, we're never going to be in this room again, whatever. And then the bell rings and whatever. And so it was cool, but it did feel like the end. It felt like closing one book of a series and opening another, which is exciting.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, to me, I think we did say a final goodbye to a lot of players. Last week, Tug, you asked the question, who do we think could come back from kind of that Edge group, that that old school group, and play an amazing game? And I think Kim is the one that I singled out. I think if Kim played a third time, she would not lie in wait the way she did on this season. And but she won her first season not being too aggressive, so I would love to see Kim play again, but hearing Tyson say, I needed to know that I don't need it anymore. That hit me different, man. That hit different. Because Tyson, being as arrogant as he can be sometimes, the way he fights through everything with this biting humor and all of this stuff, that was like a very real moment. Seeing Boston Rob talk about Amber the way he did, their story's done. And it kind of felt like it felt when we watched Rupert sacrifice himself for his wife so she could play. And Rob, you could feel he was so upset that he didn't get to do that for Amber. But I think they're both kind of at peace because he watched her, fight on Edge, and he's so proud of her. And I think they can walk away, Ethan was very poignant in the words that he said as well. So I do hope we see, I would like to see Yul and Kim come back. And I don't think Yule's done by any stretch of the imagination. If Survivor chooses to have him back, I think there is a place for him in today's game. But it felt, watching The Last Dance, and being as big of a fan of Survivor as I am, and watching Boston Rob this last time out, it kind of felt like The Last Dance. It kind of feels like, as we're watching The Last Dance, we're also reevaluating LeBron's career, right? And so, as we're saying, Boston, if you're a fan of Survivor and you think Boston Rob is on the Mount Rushmore, now you've got the baton handed off to Tony, and you're trying to find his place. And did he just unseat the Queen? Did he just remove another great player from Mount Rushmore with his performance here? So it's been a nice companion piece for me, being a fan of the NBA and being a fan of Survivor, and watching this happen at the same time.
Kenny, what do you think?
Yeah, as far as the Edge competition goes, again, I think that every season, like I said, every season is fair. The game rules are the game rules, and the winner is the winner. They did the game. Again, I just didn't think that it was fair that Natalie getting voted off first gave her the greatest advantage going into that challenge. Like, the fact that when she sat down and gave her resume of everything she did on the island, I didn't realize she was involved in all of those advantages being given out. But then it's just like, well, Sophie never got those opportunities,
Or Nick.
Or Nick. Like, these people who lasted so much longer in the game had no chance. If Natalie had no advantages, she would have been like one of those people in the challenge last night that we didn't hear their name called one time by Jeff Probst because they were so far behind. She was so far behind. And so, like, I wish that Tyson or Boston Rob would have done well, but then they also had advantages. Who knows what a fair competition would have been. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. And then, to be honest, when they were doing the goodbyes, I was so in game mode. I was just like, okay, Natalie's back in the game. She's going back in here soon. Like, what's going to happen? But then knowing that there's not a reunion, this sort of serves as a replacement there to get your final thoughts from some of these players who aren't going to come back. And, certainly, some of them are gone forever and from the game of Survivor. And I would like to see if Ethan wants to give it another shot, because I would like to see more of Ethan. I would like to see an Ethan season that's more of in the game. And the fact that he I realized, the way he was talking about the game was certainly like, oh man, like he wanted to play it again after he had survived cancer, and he gets in here now. And I would like to see maybe more of him, but mostly I was just like thinking about Natalie going back into the game and what that meant. And
you're a person that's told us that you've cried a couple times while watching the show. So for you to eschew the emotionality of it because you're so focused is really.
I cried like 6 times if it had to do with Tony and Sarah during this season. Many of those moments, like, I definitely think at the end of this episode, for sure, it's just like locked in. Like, the Tony, Sarah, Kopsara storyline from 30 to 40 is like my favorite thing that's ever happened on the show. They're 2 of my top 5 players of all time, probably. And I'm very excited to have seen Tony win. So, that's it.
It was a wreck, man. I was a wreck. But then, man, what really, Tyson hit different. Boston Rob talking about Amber hit different. I'm a mess. And then as Ethan's talking about surviving cancer, and they cut to Adam, and what went on, and how he lost his mother, and he's standing next to a man who beat something that his mom couldn't. And just how cathartic it is for Adam to be out there, and the way that he fights to save people now. And I was a blubbering disaster. I found myself getting to game mode later. I think we flipped emotional places, Kenneth, this episode.
My quick thoughts on Edge. I think that there needs to be some reconstruction on what Edge. I sort of agree with all of you. I felt like, Natalie played the best game on Edge, but that's like being like the best college basketball player versus the best pro basketball player. Like, this felt like the game doesn't equate. So they need to do some reconstruction on not only the economy, the fire token thing, but also now that it seems like they have time to think about this. So it's something worth reconsidering, because people that get booted early, they're still on your TV. So you get to still follow their journeys, which I think is important for us as fans of the show. But what it means and how you can like help your resume, I think there's just needs to be some things rethought with Edge. I do like the Kim idea a lot. I think, having not seen Kim's season, I thought she came to play. And I thought, like, that's a person, both RJ and Scott is a person I thought, like, at least she was trying to make moves. And one thing I'll say about Kim, and also Michelle, Michelle's skill set probably is not as good as Kim's. They both knew where their positions were in the game at all times. And that, to me, shows high sign of your ability level of Survivor. To know your place is, like, probably one of the best skills you can have on the show. So
if I could quickly interject one random side note before we say goodbye to everyone from the Edge. I was like, sometimes I would watch the Edge and I'd be like, and I'm like, do they really eat a scoop of rice? I'm just like, I was like, man, is it really that tough? And then also just to see Boston Rob in episode 1 versus Boston Rob at the end, it was like young Boston Rob to me again. He looked so much thinner and younger by the end. And it was like, oh yeah, I guess they really are starving.
I think, Tug, you mentioned like a college basketball player. Like the more I think about it, if Natalie would have won, it would have kind of felt like, my job is centered around the Dallas Cowboys, so there's a level of bitterness here. But it kind of would have felt like Nick Foles' Philadelphia Eagles winning the Super Bowl. Like you get to skip, like the whole season and show up in the playoffs and just like go on a run. And there's something awkward to that. Like it's not the same. It's not what we're used to. It's not what we're accustomed to. And so it just, that's what I view. Like there's almost like you could argue, and Kenny kind of made a great argument for it. It's almost like if you're the best strategy in many ways is to just, be voted off first and go to the Edge and then kind of like bide your time there and formulate your plan and just hit the fast forward button and get yourself to the final 6. It's ridiculous.
There's less strategy because your mind, your body's tiring and you're hungry, but you're not in the intensity day in and day out trying to figure out who's gunning for you. There's a finite date where you're going to have to return and you're going to return as a collective group. So you really get to like figure out your own mental health to prepare for that. Whereas you never know who's coming for you on the island. It's just a different toll psychically and mentally, I think, that we don't talk about.
It would be interesting if they added a element of maybe not every week, but maybe every now and then that they vote somebody off of Edge. Like all of a sudden it's a surprise tribal where, alliances have to still be played on Edge,
That
adds another layer of who you send to Edge, because who you send home, what number might come back. But I think 6 is too late in the game. I agree. I agree. You're changing the face of the game wholly, putting somebody back in the game that late, especially if they have an idol. And Chris Underwood really kind of broke what you have to do to come back from Edge and have a shot when he took Devins out at Fire. I mean, that's the only real move that Natalie had, but I know we're going to get to that later. But as far as Edge, I think Chris doing what he did first time out really put us in a place where I think the gameplay and the risk has to be so high by that person who came back that if they don't meet that standard, there's no way they're going to win.
I agree.
I thought like I just thought like one of the strongest things that Tony said during the final tribal was that he played games at day and he played the game during the night when he would go in and search for an idol every single night, and it took 26 days to find an idol. And you think about like the effort that Tony put in day and literally night to win Survivor. Like Natalie did do like a couple really difficult challenges, but what about the other 200 hours per week where she wasn't having to do any of that stuff like Tony, who was literally working 24 hours a day?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm glad you bring up the comparison between Natalie and Tony, because we let's move into the game, and Natalie's welcome back. We move to the 6th vote where Michelle wins immunity, which I was excited for my number 1 draft pick to make the deep run, and then we have a big round of idol plays at Tribal. So Michelle has immunity. They're all concerned about what Natalie's whether she has an idol, right? So Natalie does have an idol. She plays an idol. Tony's forced to play an idol. Ben plays an idol. So that means the votes go on either Ben or Natalie. So there's no votes for that tribal. There's a revote between Denise and Sarah, and Denise goes in a unanimous revote. So RJ, talk to me about what you were thinking when you watched this vote. Were the right moves made? Was Denise ultimately the right person to go? Your thoughts at 6?
I thought this was a flaw in Michelle, especially, for somebody that had been so keenly aware of the power alliance that Tony and Ben and Sarah were together. Especially once Jeff explained the unique tiebreaker that would have existed there, I thought they would have just drawn rocks. I thought that Sarah and Denise would have drawn rocks together, but that was cool to know that that's how that works, I guess. But I thought that Michelle, because Natalie was clearly at that point so new to everything and asking questions and wondering, who the best person to discuss the situation or to target was. I thought Michelle should have targeted Sarah, and because we knew that Ben and Tony were going to put their votes on Denise, and I thought if Michelle and Natalie put their votes on Sarah, then they would have sent it to fire. And I think that it would have been far more wise and I know they obviously ultimately made it to, the final 3, but for both Natalie and for Michelle to break up, Natalie talked so much about how her main focus in returning was breaking up and disrupting the power 3 when they literally, voted Denise out when they had a chance to at least jeopardize Sarah's place in the game at that point in time. But I also thought that whole sequence showed the flaw in Sarah's game, because Sarah talked so much about, and we saw the production really made her look interesting, to say the least, in talking about how she was in control and she knew what was going to happen, etc. And that really kind of highlighted Tony's awareness. If Sarah and either Sarah or Ben listened to Tony and put votes on Denise, then I think a lot changes. In fact, maybe Ben wins the game because Ben doesn't have to burn his idol, Tony doesn't have to burn his idol, and then they can use it at the final or the next tribal, and Sarah's gone, and then maybe Ben wins the final immunity challenge. Who knows? That was a really, sort of timeline altering moment for me.
Totally agree. Kenneth, what are your thoughts on where we were at 6?
Yeah, I thought that at that point there were a lot of things that could happen. Obviously, like RJ said, a Ben, Michelle, Natalie finale is very interesting. I mean, in terms of who comes out. I think Michelle wins against those two. And so then definitely in terms of just getting to the final 3 that would win you the game. And I was also surprised, because Sarah and Tony were also debating whether or not Natalie could win the game. And I was sitting there yeah, I definitely think that she could win the game. We found out that she really couldn't. But I thought she was such a threat. If they had seen it from the perspective of we need to get Natalie into the final 3, I wonder how that would have changed the perspective if they had known that she didn't have a very good chance at winning the game, because people clearly wanted to vote for the best player and that was left at final tribal. And obviously everyone was seeing Tony as the best player. Obviously Natalie also wanted to get Tony out, but it would have been interesting if they had instead of focused on anyone but instead of focusing on getting Natalie out, if they had just sort of redirected. And then when Tony was trying to say that she had an idol or that she could have an idol, at least plan for an idol, I think we were all sort of just wondering and I was definitely as the person who had picked Sarah to win was just ugh. Sarah's sitting there saying not only that, but come on, Tony, trust me. She doesn't have an idol. It's not the best game moment for Sarah. But yeah, I definitely, a lot of could have shifted at that tribal, of course. And I guess it played out as well as it could have.
Yeah, well, and Scott, we're just talking about the recapping the 6 vote. And yeah. I thought one thing I'll just say, I'll turn it to you just quickly. What I thought was interesting, I agree with you guys. I agree with RJ. I think it was set up as an opportunity to knock Sarah out there. I thought that was an opportunity, even in the revote, an opportunity to basically, Sarah has this big moment. And usually you see a lot of times when big moments happen, you're like, we take you out right now. Like, we don't want you to earn, more votes in this moment. Let's just use this opportunity to let you go. And I thought, and the only thing I'll say is when they did the revote with Sarah and Denise, Natalie and Michelle powwowed. And I was just wondering if Natalie was aware of the Edge had like a ranking order, like who they thought was like the best. And then maybe in some world they thought Denise was more highly thought of than Sarah because of the big move that she made with Sandra. Otherwise, it felt like to me Sarah was the right person to vote out. And also, I was questioning Ben. A couple of questionable Ben choices that we'll talk about later. But even here, we talk about the fact that he voted. He talks about his friendship with Denise, but then he voted her out. I thought that was just I didn't quite figure out where Ben's loyalties really truly lied, because of his. He seemed like he was close to Denise the entire time, but it seemed like he was more loyal to Sarah. So, anyway, your thoughts, Scott, on the sixth vote?
Man, that vote. I found myself over the season when I first started. I was like, Tony's a one-trick pony. He's crazy. He's a little bit of a joke sometimes, and I had recency bias for sure. Coming out of his second attempt to play the game and how quickly he went out. But I found myself just angry that people weren't playing up to his level, I think. And I think it took me a little while to realize that I was not mad at Tony. I was mad at the other players for not stepping up and getting to his level. But last night it was just too late. So then I was in full on root for Tony mode. And I was getting mad with him when he's sitting there telling them, Natalie's got an idol. It just showed again, like how in tune with the game he was. He knew what was going on. He knew we should split the votes. We don't get to this situation and Denise needs to go home anyway.
Exactly.
And it showed me how much Tony had grown as a player, though, to defer to Ben and Sarah, because he didn't want to rock the boat, because he still needed his shields, right? He did such a great job of having big time players around him or imagined threats, like the whole way through. As far as Ben's move, I think you're completely right. I agree with you, Tug. It was very confusing, that moment. I think it kind of showed us what might be coming our way. I think Ben was exhausted, and I, at the end of the season, feel bad about watching this, and speaking about people too harshly sometimes. I know I'm a very harsh critic of Michelle's, and Ben, I've been on what is Ben doing all season long? He's trying to play this new social Ben, but he's still just, really cutting himself off from everybody. And I thought that he would fight for Denise a little bit more in that moment, but I think at that point he was just, okay, that's fine. I see what happened out here. I got what I needed personally, and I'm ready to bail. And I think it just shows how much this game broke people mentally. I think it broke Jeremy mentally this year. I think him leaving tribal council, I never expected out of Jeremy earlier in the season. And I think it broke everybody to a point. And for Tony to make it through that, I was rooting for that at that tribal. For him, I'm just at that point flipped completely to Tony mode. He's got to make it through this. That's the only way this can end, and I'll be satisfied. So I was glad what happened to that tribal, because to me, the worst tribal council, the worst final tribal is Denise, Ben, and Michelle, or Denise, Ben. I mean, Natalie, if she sneaks in there, I think she beats Denise and Ben. But yeah, if Denise sticks around and makes the final three, to me, I'm like, oh, that's to me worst case scenario. She checked out 2 weeks ago. So
I agree with you.
Do you guys
go ahead, Kenny.
just quickly, do you guys think there were too many idols in the game? Do you think it's gotten to the point now where it's too many? Because to have that many idols in play at the 6, it just felt like, well, then we have so few options. I understand that it's oh, cool, rare moment. You're seeing a drop kick, extra point or something like that. But at the same time, it's just
Including-
like, at the same time, I'm kind of just like, hey, in the nature of Survivor, in the spirit of Survivor, how about one person safe? Like, who do they want to vote out? Who do you know? But it's just like, not to get, I love hidden immunity idols, but I wonder if there were too many at the end.
I felt that way in Game Changers when Sari went out, when there was like literally no other option. I think that was at 6, when she was literally the only person that wasn't safe. I didn't feel quite that way last night. I think what I felt, and I don't like actually feel this way, but I felt like everyone's personal history, there was too much personal history, if that makes sense. But I mean, that was what made the season awesome. Like Scott kind of talked about, I thought, what Ben said about, Ben had the most powerful statement to me of the whole season when he said that he got to a point where he couldn't even trust his wife because of his experience on the island. I mean, that's hitting in a different level. And so I really do think that players took their previous experiences in a lot of different directions and played as a result of them. And that really affected their game. They weren't the same players because of it. Players that felt slighted as winners, players that felt they wanted authority, like Kim, players that felt like they could play a certain way. And I think that really, from my perspective, adjusted the way Ben approached the final 6, final 5, because, it seemed like he was not completely satisfied with the aftermath of the way he won, and obviously viewed as a controversial winner because of the first fire making challenge and everything. But so I think there was too much of that, but that was obviously like the hook of the season. So it's hard to, say that I didn't enjoy that. But that, to me, I think if that final 6 played out with new first-time players, I think it's different because of their histories. They adjusted accordingly.
I don't think there's too many idols in the game as much as I think there's too many swaps that forces the game to put idols into play. If you eliminate that what is supposed to be a surprise random tribe swap pre-merge, if you eliminate that, you eliminate the amount of idols. I think what we're forgetting here is just how long Ben and Tony had idols for, right? And weren't in fear of needing to play them. That's the only reason they're around, right? I think you have to protect whoever comes back from Edge in that case. If you are Survivor, like the game of Survivor, because they're just a sitting duck when they come back. But Ben had his idol for a long time, and it never got flushed. So I think it was just, again, somewhat of like lazy, poor gameplay by some of these. It was not lazy or poor. It was like paralyzed gameplay post-merge that didn't flush any idols or anything that gave them such a safety net towards the end. So we've seen seasons with this many idols. We just see them get flushed earlier.
Yeah.
My sense would be, I think I kind of agree with Scott. I think navigate the random tribe swaps, but I also think maybe eliminate the idols like around 9, and like let's start to see, like put the Edge contestant back around 9, and let's just start to see a little bit more of that pure like strategic thing happening with more players involved. I think Scott made this point earlier, but like 6 is just it's just too easy. It's just like especially if you're a comp beast like Chris and Natalie both were, like you come in with an idol, you're guaranteed 1. Then you just got to win 2, and you're in. Like it's just not that inconceivable of a thing to happen. So, but I'm glad you brought this up because the Ben thing is an interesting thing to me. I'm glad to see his evolution as a human. But I'm not watching. I'm watching for that, but I'm also have to critique his performance. And I thought, like, when we moved to the 5 vote, he basically Tony, I believe, wins immunity at 5. Let me just double check. Yeah, Tony. Yep. Natalie finds the idol. So the idols that get flushed, Natalie finds. Ben and Tony look. Tony does burns the midnight oil, doesn't find anything. Natalie does. So that throws a wrench in the plans. So Tony wins immunity. And then basically they try to pit the two sides try to pit Sarah onto their team. She's a swing vote. And Ben says, go ahead and vote me out. Ben does go ahead and vote for Michelle. So is he fully committed to leaving? I'm not sure. RJ, what are your thoughts on where we were at 5? I definitely have some thoughts on the gameplay here, but love to hear what you have to say at 5.
My thought is I can understand if people are bothered by this because, like it felt like lying down. I mean, I actually thought he was, I thought it was strategy at first, like just trying to lower Sarah's guard. And I was disappointed in one sense that Sarah didn't have the idea herself originally to go after Ben because, she was even talking about how at some point I'm going to have to, do something like this. And it would have been nice, I think, to see her initiate that thought on her own, in a true sense with Natalie and Michelle. It was a really beautiful conversation in a lot of ways. I mean, to see Ben and Sarah be that close. But it was confusing. I mean, it felt a lot, not that it was the same, but it felt like Sandra leaving the Edge and just sort of not punting, but just kind of accepting fate, and feel like we don't see that a lot in any sense on Survivor, really. And I also thought, Sarah was really critical of some of the moves Tony made throughout the season and how they, hindered her game. If there was any conversation, we certainly didn't see it, but she sort of unilaterally made the decision that she was going to take out Ben, and that was a big move that affected Tony's game. So I mean, I thought that was something else that Tony had to deal with. I mean, seemingly his in some senses his strongest ally just taken out from him by his actual strongest ally, and so it was a very, very questionable thing that I was kind of shocked happened at Final 5 on a season of all winners.
Yeah, Kenny, what do you think?
As much as I want to give Ben credit for, doing something for my favorite player, Sarah, I'm not gonna. I could not erase the memories of the way he treated other players in the game. So, good for him, but
very good point.
No hard feelings. Get out of here. Goodbye.
Yeah. I want to talk about what was leading up to Tribal real quick because it sets up some things later. Tony goes up into the spy nest and sees the conversation between Natalie and Sarah, where Natalie tells Sarah, "I have an idol," which I think is the right move. I think she had to go and talk to somebody. I think that was the beauty of the partnership of Tony and Sarah all year long. Is that in the first half of the season, nobody could believe that Tony and Sarah would play this thing all the way out. The way Tony treated Sarah the first time they played, flipping on her, sending her home when she was a swing vote. And then, at this point in the game, for them to still be that strong and not be targeted as a pair that has to be broken up by anyone is still just mind-blowing to me. Just how strong their bond was and how able they were to mask that, either by Tony's boisterous gameplay or Sarah's masterful wrangling of Tony behind the scenes. They really were just an amazing pair. Tony's spy nest is flashy, but the fact that people give Sarah information, I think we forget that Kim really thought that Sarah was an ally. I think we forget that Sophie really thought that Sarah was her ally. And at that point, I start going, wow, Sarah's got a really great resume here, too, because of her social gameplay. What she was able to do, the information she was able to glean, and the way they were able to steer it together, that showed me a lot. But Sarah was smart enough to know she still needed one feather in her cap. She needed to flip on somebody. But if she flipped on Tony, that it would be out of her character to do that to her own ally. She believes that she can do anything any other player in the game can do, regardless of gender bias, regardless of anything. And she knew she couldn't send Tony home. And flipping on Ben was the best move. Ben falling on his sword was confusing to me. I think he was just tired, and he understood how people perceived him. And he's okay with that now because he knows who he is as a person. He knows who he can trust outside of this game. And we forget all of the mental health issues that Ben talked about the first time he played. And I think we really got to respect that here. The fact that he came out a second time and put himself through it, I'm not going to fault Ben for what he did. I think Sarah made the right move. And I think Ben voting for Michelle was just him saying, Sarah, I've got you with whatever way you decide. If you want to keep me here, Sarah, I'm gonna put my vote where you would put it if it's not on me. So I think Ben was completely resigned. I think he just didn't want to let his alliance down if they decided to keep him around.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are making a lot of really interesting points. I mean, I like the idea that Kenny mentioned about, it's nice to see Ben show some real humanity, but he was a jerk a lot of times throughout the season. So it was like selective jerking. It was like selective niceness. I mean,
he's playing from ahead. It's harder to play from ahead than behind. And I think Ben has been an underdog his whole life, and he didn't know how to react when he was in a position of power.
Yeah.
The
other two things I want to mention is this is sort of like reactive thinking. Does it help Sarah? Sarah sees a vote for Ben to advance her game, but does she knock out Michelle and keep Ben, then have Ben beat Tony and fire? Does that help her chances? Like, is that a move where she just needed to clear her head and say, I need you. You and I don't quit on me. We can actually both do this, and let's meet in the final. So that's one thing that I think maybe could have been interesting for Sarah to really help her game, even though she thought she wasn't playing too many steps ahead. The other thing I'll say, not that it would really help Natalie, but the optics. She chose to use the idol on herself when the votes were on Michelle. So she could have, even if it didn't matter, because it wouldn't have mattered, but she would have gotten idol played on Michelle. Those votes would have counted, and she could have used that as another sort of feather in her cap. Talk about the perfect game. We talk about play fire, but also use your idol. Kenny talks about this all the time. Use your idol on someone else. Like, it's just good. It just looks good.
Just thinking about that too while you were talking, because you weren't saying this, I don't think. So I apologize if I'm just repeating what you just said. But if Ben was going to sacrifice himself for Sarah at 5, why doesn't he just play his idol for Sarah at 6? Say, I'll make fire against Denise. If you're going to vote me 2-2. He didn't know that was what the result would be. But he's like, I'm willing to go home. I'll protect Sarah because I need her so badly in this game. I'll protect her with my idol. And then he finds out, okay, you got to make Sarah against Denise. He crushes or Denise in the fire. Then he does have something on his resume. But it didn't really seem like he wanted to play. What happened in that one day where he went from, I'm saving myself with an idol, to vote me out of here?
It was a very strange sequence. And Scott, you touched on, I think the one part of all this that I don't think Sarah's getting enough credit for, to be just, sorry, Kenny, the president of her fan club for one moment. You mentioned how the spy nest gets all the flash. I don't know why it was necessary for Sarah's conversation with Natalie. Because if Sarah and Tony are truly this aligned pair that is operating as one, why does Tony need to be privy to the conversation that's like whatever information Sarah's gathering in this particular case that Natalie has an idol, she can simply just relay to Tony? Like, there's in fact, like Tony shouldn't, like, he should be assigned no credit for any spy nest moment that Sarah is a part of, because that is her work. Natalie talking to her is 100% credited to Sarah. I don't understand what the purpose of Tony, and then he talked. I was up there for an hour and whatever, and that was funny and it was flashy, but it really truly was unnecessary. In fact, he could have been out working Michelle in that moment.
Yes.
Yeah. I think Tony just had such a strong sense of the game. I think he knew that they were getting to the point where Sarah, and I think he implemented a little bit of the buddy system. Even though he went and hid himself, he did it in a way that made Sarah feel secure that their partnership was still strong. But I think he was pulling a little Boston Rob. I think that's what made his game so great, is he took from everybody. He took from Ben. He got up before the sun came up and went and found idols, right? That's what Ben did when Ben won his season. He did this little buddy system situation, right? Where that Boston Rob has done before. He was like, I'm not going to let Sarah out of my sight. I'm going to be with my partner. I'm not going to let anybody come to her at a point where we could be completely split, now that he was vulnerable. But what I was really saying there is that if Sarah does make it to the final 3 against Tony, that's a feather in her cap. Tony had to go hide. to find information. I was out in the open. People were coming to me. But yeah, I completely agree with you that Tony shouldn't have gotten credit for anything in that particular moment.
Yeah,
I think what Tony did was smart for his own game. And then he twisted it to be like, hey, no, I was in the spy nest, blah, blah, blah. But yeah,
I think to your point though, the credit that is Tony's is that Sarah was so willing to do it. I mean, and maybe some of that's their partnership, but and that I think contradicts. I think Sarah played a great game. I'm not as high on her as Kenny is, but she was very vocal that she and Tony were equal partners when she, in this particular case, allowed credit to be Tony's when she could have very easily been like, no man, like I'll handle this, you go handle that. And so it, at the very least, to us, allowed for the presentation that Tony was part of it as well, which is perhaps the more impressive thing than in some, lights. But yeah, I like the way Sarah, called out Natalie's idol in her buff. I mean, that was really perceptive and stuff. And so she has those tools in her game and those feathers in her cap. And it would have been interesting to see her, kind of be like, Tony, it's good. Like, you don't always have to be in the spy.
Spy, and that's the thing. Like, Spy Nest we didn't see Tony get any strategical advantages or at least make any strategical moves because of Spy Nest. Even when he overhears Denise potentially trying to backstab him, he doesn't get her out. It doesn't change the game at all. But I think what the jury wants to see, what the viewers 100% want to see, is players trying. So anything that you're doing to try, I think that I'm referencing heroes versus villains. Only me and Tug and RJ were talking before, and they haven't seen this, but Scott has. But it's just like JT was seen as doing one of the worst moves of all time. He gives an idol to the enemy, but if he does get to the end, I don't care that it didn't work. He tried something. If Adam gets to the end, I don't care if the podium wasn't an idol. He's playing the game. We're all there to watch you play the game. That's what we want to see. So Spy Nest and all that kind of stuff, it didn't make any changes in his thing, but at least it was an effort. So and Tony was the biggest effort guy since Russell Hantz, maybe of all time. Like, he's just effort. And it's just like, you just want those guys out there in the field for you. And when you get that combination of effort and talent, yeah, that's when you get, I think, Tony may be the greatest player of all time.
Two things real quick, just before we move on, because I know we spent a lot of time on this, but I think this was another spotlight on the fact that if you don't play the perfect game coming back from Edge, you're not going to win anymore. Chris Underwood came back, played an idol for himself. The next tribal council played an idol for someone else. Then took himself to fire, beat Devins, who is one of the most likable competitors in Survivor history, sends him home, and then was able to win. Sarah made a mistake not keeping Ben around for fire. She really wanted to get rid of Tony. I don't think she ever did. I think she thought she could beat Tony in the final, and she wasn't worried about it. I think Natalie completely played it wrong, playing the idol for herself. And I think you guys are completely right. I can't remember who said that. I think maybe it was Tug that, on both of those points, you're completely right. I just think in the psyche of Sarah, she was making the move against Ben to say, I don't care. I can beat Tony if I have to beat Tony. And I think that was really her mindset. And I really respect I respect the hell out of her for that. I think Sarah has moved into the top echelon of players of all time for me as well. Just like with Kenneth, I'm not as high as you are, but the game she played this time, I thought it was smart. I thought it was great. She kept on giving Tony enough rope to maybe possibly hang himself, and still could take credit for all those things. But anyway.
No, I like what you said. I agree. I think she played a great game. I think her Achilles heel was the fact that, she thought she was on the equal footing with Tony, where she just, I think the jury just didn't feel that way. She did, and she wasn't able to change her mindset. Case in point being the fact that she thought Natalie never had an idol, and she talked Tony off of it. Tony could have used that in a Tony versus Sarah final tribal, being like, guys, I went with you. And that
but we don't know. We'll never know if the jury thought that, though. We'll never really know, because she didn't make it to final three.
No, I know.
She could have been right.
Well, she wasn't right in the fact that Natalie didn't have an idol. I mean,
right.
Yeah,
That's
no.
true. Yeah.
I think it's kind of what Kenny said. Like, it's about not effort, but it's about jewelry. It's about, at Tribal they get to see Immunity Necklace. And I thought, to your point, Kenny, when Tony was making his case and talking about the spy nest, the one person who lit up was Adam, who's the most fan of everybody, and so the point really lands with him, which is sort of emblematic of how it lands with the viewer at home. Sarah didn't have those tangible moments, you know what I mean? Tony was a filet mignon steak, you know what I mean? Sarah was pick another great meal, like an incredible piece of salmon that just, but you think of like filet mignon, whatever, but like salmon can be really good. It just doesn't look the same way. And sometimes you don't think to order it or whatever, but it wasn't as obvious, I think, as Tony, and Tony's a loud, boisterous person. So I think that it's hard to overcome that perception.
I'll also say, this is what I think about Sarah and Tony and why I like Sarah's game is that, absent of the fact that Tony can never win Survivor again, because he's too notable now, and Sarah probably can't win either. Absent that, if you had to pick, if you just knew these players now, we've watched them for 3 seasons. If you just knew these players, they're going into a fresh season of Survivor. Like, who would you rather pick to win? Because I would rather pick Sarah, because I think Tony is high risk, high reward. I think he's either going to get game changers or he's going to win. And Sarah, to me, is always going to go far and deep into the game because of the way she plays.
I thought Tony adapted his game a little bit. I mean, the fact that he was the only person hip to the idea that Natalie could have the idol, I don't think he's as perceptive as Sarah might be, but I think that seeing Tony's ability to grow and lurk and temper his aggression, I think I might take Tony. I mean, it's kind of basketball in some sense. Tony is kind of like LeBron. I mean, he's going to either have to score 45 himself, for the team to win, or it's not going to happen. But he's a dude who can score 45, not somewhat easily, but it's well within his wheelhouse. So I might lean Tony. But Sarah's like Klay Thompson. You know what I mean? Like, you can always count on her for something no matter what. So it just depends if you would rather ride that and think that that's going to be enough against your given competition.
I mean, Tony's always a high chance to flame out. So I think if you're playing smart money, I think, Kenneth, I think you're right. I think Sarah has shown that she just has an ability to create trust in people, to create that. Tony wins immunity challenges, and if he doesn't, does he go home? And if he doesn't, does all of the groundwork that Sarah laid with Sophie and Kim, which paid off for her, which paid off for them protecting Tony, really, if he doesn't have that necklace, does he go home at some point? Like, I don't think the same is said of Sarah. I think Sarah ends up in the same position, even though she's not winning immunity challenges in this season. If Tony doesn't win those 3 in a row, there's a much higher chance that he's gone and he doesn't win this thing. And I think that's a testament to Sarah's steady play. So I think if I have to choose the 2 of them the next time they play, I would take Sarah.
I think if you do like a days played, like a cumulative days played, I think you take Sarah. It's because I think, like you said, Scott, like much more high, probability of flaming out for Tony. But I agree with RJ. I saw evolution in the game. I just felt like he was very in tune with the game. Everyone talked about how perceptive Sarah was. I thought Tony was equally perceptive, if not more. Like he was sensing stuff out. He just showed me just a really, really high quality of play. And as Scott said earlier, as soon as Natalie came on board and said Tony's the target, I was 100% in on Tony. Like, I felt like, as a person who was not a Tony fan coming in, I was rooting for Tony. I was like, dude, do this. Like, the hardest thing in this game is to be the hunted and to win. Like, that's incredible. Yeah. It's an incredible performance. When he did the fire, and we'll get to this quickly because we'll move forward. Like, I was like doing paces. I was pacing around my room, like pumping myself up. Like, you did this. You know what I mean? So was I. But
I was sweating.
It was Pat Mahomes, to go back to that analogy. It was Pat Mahomes' Chiefs falling down 24-0 to the Texans. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, like break out that skill that we know is in there as soon as Natalie targeted him, and he did. And like, again, the fact that he still did not garner a single vote is just it's very reminiscent of Derek Lavister's game in Big Brother. That's what it reminded me of the most. Like, just, I mean, complete and total control, winning the right times. Although I think Tony was just visibly a little bit more of a threat given his history, but it was a very similar game in that particular capacity.
All right, well, let's jump ahead because this conversation's awesome. We can do this for all day, but let's move ahead to the final four, which is it's a challenge. Scott talked earlier about like taking pieces of people's games, like Tony said. We're starting to see Survivor take pieces and sort of immortalize them as the final things. I don't know what our thoughts are on this. Scott obviously doesn't like it, but this seems to be the final four challenge now. I'll let you guys give your opinions when we get to you. But what happens is Natalie wins, decides to take Michelle and forces Cops R Us to play make fire, and ultimately Tony does win. Any thoughts on that before we move to right plays? Thoughts on that game, Scott? What do you think about the final four situation?
They when I was down there, I ran EPK for CBS for Game Changers, and I got to do individual immunity challenges. Yeah. Amazing. So the stepping up over the wires and stacking blocks as dominoes, and then having to step all the way over that wire cage, the one that I did it in 1 minute 9 seconds when I ran that individually, and it was a record. It was a record at like behind the scenes, until Andrea did it, and she crushed it in like 42 seconds. I don't know, but that season, Andrea just crushed that challenge. But we saw that again this year. We saw that one again. But I was inside the trailer and saw the challenge designers and everything that they have set up. I just feel like they've got so much more in the tank. And I know that they're like relying on the nostalgia factor, but adding a ball to a challenge we've seen 3 times be the final challenge, to me, just like, I don't know. I understand it doesn't help the puzzle guy. It doesn't help the strength and endurance guy. It's only mental focus. I get that, but I'd love to see them stop doing that. When Michelle wins immunity, the immunity necklace on the water slide challenge, once she got to that puzzle, she had done that before. And we've seen this. We've seen people completely break and be like, I can't remember how to do this puzzle, but we've seen it be a leg up enough times to know that like, it's just one of those things, again, that goes into the game that is kind of an unfair advantage for some people, and I don't know. I'd love to see them, at least for that final challenge, do something new and fresh. As far as Natalie winning, great. I think she made the wrong call after she decided who to take with her to the end. But
what way?
I think she should have put herself in the driver's seat. I think that's the only way. Yeah, I think she should have been able to know that's the only way she wins.
Yeah.
I think she came back peddling the Tony is the biggest target thing. It took on a life of its own. And once it was said at Tribal Council at 6, and then reiterated at 5, she has backed herself, even if she thought it was a lie, she's backed herself into a corner where she's told the jury 2 times in a row that it's the truth.
It really is. She's telling the jury what they want to hear.
Yeah. So if you have backed yourself into a corner by telling the jury he's the biggest threat, then you got to do what you got to do. You got to get rid of it. And I firmly believe that Rob would have voted for Natalie had it not been, had Tony not been sitting there next to her. I in that moment where Rob goes, what? You had one job and you couldn't get it done.
Yeah.
It's game over. But if she gets that one job done, even misplaying the idol at 5, if she makes the right call at 4, she builds fire. But I think, and this is something very interesting, people talked about it all year long, about Amber being the one that was mother henning over on the island. She was the one that was making fire. She was the one that was cooking meals. Amber was taking care of everybody in such a strong way that I think Natalie was saving herself to be able to get these tokens, to be able to make this hustle move happen. I think Natalie wasn't confident in making fire because she never had to on Edge. You've got enough people there taking care of you.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely said that. RJ, what are your thoughts on the final 4?
So I am a fan of some tradition I mentioned Big Brother, a minute ago. I like OTEV, when that happens. I like that there are staples that you identify with the game. I like that the final Big Brother head of household is the balance thing. Like that stuff is cool that it's part of the game. But I'm with Scott. I mean, there's something cool to, seeing different challenges that have been done before in new seasons with new players. I liked this season, for example, when Jeff would say, Michelle played this and she won. Like those were cool little stats and whatever. But I don't know. I think, and I would have rather seen this challenge with both hands. If you're going to do this and you're going to make, let it be both hands and, let that total, just wear them out with it. The one hand thing, I think, obviously expedites it, but I'm a fan of a softer endurance, like standing on a platform or something. Like some of the endurance competitions are obviously way out there, but like early on seasons when they would all have to stand on a pole and just kind of hold their share of something like that. I'm a fan of. I don't know. I mean, this is an interesting challenge, but seeing it, year in and year out, season after season, gets a little monotonous. And so I would like to see something different. Maybe they're not balls, like maybe they're octagon shaped, you know what I mean? Like just any, the fact that it's the same thing, they don't even have to move the stuff, I mean, it needs to be a little bit different for me to really, really, really dive in.
Yeah, I think as far as the challenge goes, I don't know, I'm fine with it, but I guess if I have to think about it, I would say that, Survivor 1, they did the putting the hand on the whatever, and who could do it the longest,
Right.
And then it's kind of boring because it's season 1 and the way that they edited it was just, and then Richard Hatch gives up at a certain point, and he's just like, I think either of you guys are taking me, so what am I doing up there? And he was right, and he won, but it was kind of boring. But then Survivor Australia season 1, they do a similar thing, except it's on a cliff's edge or something with the ocean smashing up in their faces, and it's like the middle of the night, and they've been up there for 8 hours, and this girl is crying. She's just like, let me have this. And the guy eventually relents, and she wins, and it's this huge moment. So I definitely think Survivor Australia kept doing that, to some degree, and I do think to some degree, just like an endurance is a good final challenge. It's like, okay, 38 days, how many hours are you willing to just do this for? Because I think we would have seen Sarah and Tony and Natalie all just go forever and ever until it would have been interesting to see who breaks first and who breaks second. No offense, Michelle, you're breaking the real first, but how to see those 3 people do that. So that's the thoughts, I guess, on the challenge. And then, as far as Natalie and making fire, it is a little crazy to me. No offense to all the things that Natalie did on the Edge of Extinction, but that you have to make fire. How do you not have 30 days on the edge and learn how to make fire? Yeah, that's it. That's all you have to do. That you have to make fire. You have to know that you're going to do Chris Underwood's move. If you don't know that, you should have. So that to me was the one strange thing, was that she didn't how good would you have been at fire? You would have made a fire in 2 seconds if you had worked on it for 30 days.
I think Scott's point too. Yeah, about building that up. It's almost strategy at that point to lie. Even if Tony isn't this, whatever, but just to hype up your target, right? If you're truly taking the Chris Underwood path, it is almost strategy to just hype up person and then go slay the dragon. So that you create the perception is what you want it to be. And she maybe inadvertently did that, but and I actually bought her logic, I guess, that she was at peace with herself, but this isn't the thing you can be at peace with yourself about. You can't reach a point of peace. That's the difference, I think, between the game she played and Tony's. He was never at peace. He was always moving and always trying.
You guys bring up a great
I feel
point.
like every time I'd say something, sorry, man. Every time I'd tweet something or say something, Boston Rob, they cut away to Boston Rob, and he'd be saying the exact same thing. I'm just like, man, Boston Rob's my spirit animal in this game. I mean, he's completely right in the fact that you came back, you did the smart thing, you created a big target, you tried to divide, and she did in a way divide and conquer that alliance. The way it happened wasn't all her, but she did, have two idols. She had all of the tools, and again, like, it's tough, right? In this season of all winners, because towards the end, people started making the right moves, just missed one thing. And she did. She just missed one thing. And it shows you such the knife's edge that Tony walked. He didn't miss one thing. And that was very rewarding for us as fans watching Winners at War.
And just to interject really quickly, also just speaking of The Last Dance again, it's like if you're talking about Michael Jordan, you're talking about the team with the best player. Michael Jordan's never going to say, you handle that guy.
Mm-hmm.
She got there against the best player. She had to be the one. Not only would she have taken Tony out, but she would have taken Tony out. So that's the whole thing. If she had done that, she would have taken him out of the final three. And that was the biggest move that she could have made. But then it also was on her resume. She had to be Michael Jordan. She had to say, I'm taking this guy out. Get out of here, Sarah. Get out of here, Michelle. I want him. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. Like, yeah, I mean, Chris set the blueprint. She had a chance to save, Michelle, like put all the, manipulate the votes at 5 to put them on Michelle, then use her idol on Michelle. Like the blueprint was there because Chris, as Scott said, Chris had done that as well. Plus, because and she's a deserving winner, and plus because Sarah's been talking up the gender bias, she actually looks better than Chris. Like it really, if she does everything Chris does and is the female representative of Edge, like it's a hard thing to argue with if you're the jury. But we get to the final 3, we get to final tribal, and Tony does a great job of doing some stand-up comedy. It felt like to me we were watching putty in his hands. Like he did some good jobs, like not even really answering some of the questions, just telling some bits, and he was just. And people were loving it. People were loving it. Like, I mean, RJ brought up Adam. Adam was like, lapping up milk. Like, he's just like, I can't believe what this guy put together. So, RJ, you turn it over to you on your thoughts on how Tribal went for the 3 of them.
I loved the theater of it. I loved that it was raining, and I loved that Jeff, like, there's something about his like soaked Columbia shirt that just like really adds to the effect of it all. I mean, I thought I was, Tony can be so all over the place that I was a little worried because I'm with you. I mean, I both of you, all of you. At that point, I mean, we're Team Tony, and at that point, I'm panicked that Natalie's going to win, and as we've talked about, kind of, at least cast this layer over the season. And so I'm really at this point just hoping for Tony to do well. I thought, first of all, that Father Yule really just set the tone. It was a great, and he was wearing this like cardigan that just, really, like at that moment I was in total nirvana, in total, this is the show I love. These are, and I'm a Yule fan as well. I thought the questions were great. Like, and that's for me, like the final tribal can be altered or can be diminished if the questions aren't great. And I thought that the questions were great. I thought asking about their weaknesses was really strong. I still, like the new format can be a little bit clunky, but I thought they navigated themselves well. And I really, it was sort of an extension of the moment when the Edge players went and hugged Jeff. I love, we always get the like, congratulations, etc. But I loved the applause. And it really, truly, totally felt like respect for the game. It felt like this is the final tribal for season 40, all winners. It was just, it was so fascinating to think that literally everyone sitting there knew what it was like to go through that process. And so I think it lived up to that, which was, I didn't think it would, because that's a hard expectation to live up to, but it ultimately did.
Scott, what do you think?
Before I talk about the final 3, I want to talk about the emotional letdown that Tony had after he beat Sarah at Fire. I felt like it humanized Tony in such a strong way because that wasn't a put on. I think if Tony would have made one mistake in this game, it would have been him pulling, like, all of a sudden there's like this bit of Kobe and Tony all of a sudden where he's just not going to let Sarah fall. And he would have taken Sarah all the way with him if he could have. I really think if he wins that final immunity challenge, he doesn't make Sarah make fire. I think he lets those two, in his eyes, hyenas go at it, and he takes Sarah with him, and they really duke it out in a real way. And I think some people would have seen that as a sign of weakness. But I think Tony, in that moment, and watching Sarah be like, get it together, man. It's okay. It's okay. That was just such a sign of true, deep bonds. And I know it's a relationship that's been strengthened outside the game as well. But they had every reason to turn on each other. And even when Sarah turned on him and voted Ben out, there was not a word said between them really to say, hey, you flipped on me. What happened? That wasn't Tony's sense. I don't think Tony had that in his mind. I think he knew that the two of them were rock solid. That could have been the one mistake he made. But he was so emotional after that it really humanized him, I felt, in front of that entire jury. It wasn't a show. It was real. And when you get to the end, it was interesting to me. There was a couple of things he could have capitalized on. He said the fire tokens thing and the economy of this whole thing gave me a disadvantage. And he could have, if he wanted to, really pressed the gas there, which I think old Tony might have, and said, and then I went out and I got tokens from everybody I was going to vote out. Blah, blah, blah. Like, that was gameplay. But I think he understood the temperature of the room in a way that old Tony maybe necessarily wouldn't have. And he pulled back. It would have been such a big mistake to point out that he got fire tokens from people that weren't in his alliance to get himself out of the disadvantage and stick around and have an alliance member of his win that whole thing. And, I just thought he played such a great final tribal of measured Tony, which is just a testament to his growth. The one thing that bothered me early on, and I'm glad Nick corrected himself. I mean, they made me think he was not going to vote for Tony. But I cannot stand when somebody gets voted out and they sit there in tribal at the final tribal and try and throw the dude on the stool in front of him under the bus. Nick didn't want to take any part of his downfall. He didn't, in that moment, he seemed so petty. Seemed like he didn't. And he also looks like a pudgy Alexander Skarsgård's little brother. In that last tribal, he does. He's an attractive dude. He's got the vampire fangs. He looks like he's like the lesser known Skarsgård. But there's just, to me, I was surprised and very happy at the lack of that. I knew Jeremy was bitter, but we knew where Jeremy's alliance lied. And when all the votes came out in the wash, I thought everybody that voted for who they voted for, I wasn't going to hate on it. I thought Tony played a better game, but Natalie was deserving. And Michelle, in a way, was deserving. In a way, Michelle was more deserving than Natalie was. And I think she did a good job of highlighting that. Natalie survived on Edge of Extinction. I survived in the game.
Yeah.
I was on the bottom. We tried to make moves. I never had numbers, but somehow I'm still here, and I fought through it. And she had a confidence about her in saying, but I'm here because I played a good enough game to be here. She changed herself in my eyes too. I thought everybody acquitted themselves very well in that final tribal. I thought that final tribal was actually pretty impressive. I usually come out of a final tribal going, why didn't this person say this thing? Or that was a mistake, and I didn't find myself doing that at all last night.
Kenny?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think that I thought the tribal, once Tony beat Sarah in fire, I just thought that they were making fire to win the game. I didn't think that the other two had a really good shot. So I was just waiting to see who won fire. And then when Tony got there, at that point, it was just sort of, to me, I was kind of like, there was still that part of me who would come out of all the rewatch thinking like Tony pissed off a lot of people. And then they started it for a minute saying like, why did you blindside me? Why did you blindside me? But then quickly they just started talking about like, Tony, we can't figure it out. How did you blindside so many people and they like you? And so like at that point it was like, okay, it was not real. There's not really hatred. There is a little bit of like, but at the same time, yeah, he's just such a likable guy. He is sort of a likable Russell Hantz. He has maybe perfected the game to that degree. Someone else will have to come in and re-perfect it. I do think that I do wish that Sarah had taken Natalie's place in the final three, are way more deserving to be there. But more than that, I think Tribal would have been a little bit more interesting, or a lot more interesting, because I wanted to hear them debate their games against each other. I didn't want to hear about the Edge of Extinction. And I hope, the more we talk about it, the more I hope it doesn't come back. But I know that I know that they have plans for it too. So hopefully at least do a season without it. Give us, I know they just did, but and don't do Island of the Idols ever again. But that's it. Yeah.
Wait, does Rob just live out there now? I mean, this guy's own.
You know what? I missed early in the season when you guys talked about the Sandra Rob thing. I thought it was so hilarious to me. Sandra is so far down on my list of best players now. I know she's won twice, but her leaving the game, her quitting the game, I'm finding that I don't love quitters, right? And so my thoughts about her, there are great players who have played this game that have never won, that I think, could, her anybody but me way of playing was great, but she couldn't change that. And I don't want to take away her 2 wins, of course, but her quitting here really tarnishes her legacy for me. Whereas Tony, even though he got voted out first, it's not because he didn't quit. It's not because he quit, right? He was seen as a target and a recency bias when that happened to him. But yeah, the Island of the Idols. Ouch. I just thought it was funny that Sandra just was mad at Rob because he never told her he was playing this season.
I know, that was very funny. But the thing I want to say about that, and we'll transition to sort of global look at Survivor, the question I want to ask you. I thought Natalie kind of actually stumbled. I thought she acquitted herself well. I thought, again, with 30 days on the on Edge, you have ways to sort of craft. What are you working on? Fire? You're working on your arguments. There's just ways to come in and crush this. That I feel like she didn't. Tell the story in a way that compels us to say, the Edge is a new thing. I just didn't. She didn't seize that opportunity in a way that I would like to have seen it. And I thought Tony just did what he had to do. He just basically laid his cards down and said, "This is what I'm playing with." At every disadvantage, I turn into an opportunity. And I as I said earlier, I was openly rooting for him at this point, even though I had Michelle number 1 in my draft pick. And I think Michelle's now the only contestant to play Survivor multiple times to never be voted out. Now, there's people who played 3rd times who have been subsequently voted out, but she's the current title holder of not being voted out for playing multiple times. Right. So you have to say, whatever her skill sets are, she's got some skills to last in this game. The last question I want to ask about Edge, and then we'll do one final question, is if Sarah is in the final 3 with Tony, and let's say Michelle, does Tony still win? Kenny is the person who picked Sarah in your rewatch. Does Sarah win?
Tony, to me, is Tony, Sarah, Michelle. There's 16 votes. To me, that's a solid 7-6. So it could be either one of them, but if I had to guess, I would say Tony.
RJ, what do you think?
I think the jury had been, before they were an established jury, been hyping up Tony for a while. And I think that so much had been said about Tony at various tribal councils. And I think that the last thing Tony needed, honestly, to win was nothing that he did on his own. It was Natalie putting that target on his back. I think Natalie, in many ways, cemented that Tony would win. So if in this hypothetical Natalie's gone, I think the point remains that Tony didn't have a single vote cast on him. That's the one thing I would have loved to have seen Tony beat that drum. Dude, look, I've won the game before. I'm the guy that hides in bunkers and everything, and nobody voted for me a single time. That's the most unbelievable thing that he did.
I just want to point out about the no votes thing. It's by far not the first time it's ever happened. It happens pretty regularly. And it happened a couple seasons ago on Edge of Extinction. Gavin had 0 votes against him the entire season. Chris Underwood was voted out of the game, and Chris Underwood won the game, and Gavin had no votes against him. Sarah had 2 votes against her. I don't see a huge difference at that point. So RJ, I'm not like, yeah, but like it is
It's a Sarah
impressive.
point. It's okay.
It's impressive,
Fireworks
but Sarah, it's like if you're doing like if it's like what a good social game to never get voted out. Tony had 3 immunity idols. Sarah never or 3 immunity necklaces. So those were 3 times you couldn't vote for Tony. He only went to tribal twice with DeCall. Sarah went to a tribal with 5 where her and Sophie were supposedly outnumbered 3-2 by DeCall, flipped everybody onto Rob, and didn't have to use her steal a vote to even get out of a 3-2 mess. So I think that Sarah is just as impressive in not getting votes.
I agree with that. I just think the no votes thing offers a different presentation of the resume. It's kind of like remember like when VHSs, some would come in the like sliding cardboard box, but some had the like plastic like book thing. You know what I'm talking about? Like
eggshell or what's it called? Clamshell.
That's the no votes cast aside. It's the same product. It's just packaged differently.
That's amazing, Paul. Amazing. Scott, what do you think?
I mean, you know, that's Sarah's biggest move for me was her solidifying Sophie and Ben. And Rob didn't do himself any favors with the buddy system that day. I was highly disappointed with the way that day went. And Sarah was confident, though, that she had Ben. Ben is a dog, man. You get Ben targeted at somebody, and Ben's a dog, right?
Yeah.
We talk about Last Dance. He's like the Rodman of this situation, right? Like, you know, Tony's out there making big flashy moves. Sarah's the Pippin, and they needed a Rodman. They needed a dog, and Ben was that dog. And they had to call the dog off a couple of times. He was so focused on Jeremy. He got tunnel vision pretty easily, but Rob was his tunnel vision target, and Sarah was able to identify that. I think there were a lot of things that Sarah could have said at that final tribal to really stand a chance. I think her performance at tribals over the last 3 tribals was so strong. Her statement against gender bias, which we didn't really get into, but over the last couple of years, I have really come to grips with the fact that I'm guilty of it too. Like there's no way I think that any of us can be who are born at a certain time. You know, I was born in 1979. I lived through the 80s. I mean, there's, you know, and now I have a daughter, and I'm married to just an incredible woman, and I can't help but feel like Jeff Probst, you know, and that's what makes Jeff so wonderful, is that he is willing to go through these very difficult social discussions, and he's willing to admit fault and set the tone. And you would think that he would be beyond reproach in this game, but he's not. And that's what makes this game so great, having him as an anchor, you know, to navigate all of these things. But he let Sarah talk, and then he admitted his part in all of that. And call me Lucina, I think, you know, really made an impact on like Adam, who again is a fan of the game. Like we saw him go, that was so cool.
Yeah.
I think when she gets to the end, I think the complexion of that final tribal completely changes. I don't think anybody else really ever stood a chance against Tony except Sarah. And I feel that's the one thing that's my one big regret as a fan, as a watcher, that I feel like I didn't get to see, was the 2 of them go head to head, because she did play an astounding game. She made some of the biggest moves to solidify their alliance. She protected Tony and their alliance in a way. Again, I said it earlier, but Kim trusted her. The reason Kim waited so long to try and make a move is because she trusted Sarah, right? Sophie trusted her. Sophie goes home with an idol, in big part because she trusted Sarah.
I love all this.
Sarah, everybody hears her screaming Tony down at the beach after he flips on her, saying, "You saw," and hears Tony just kowtow to her and go, I know, it's my bad. I'll do anything you want. The rest of the game, I'll do anything you want. And everybody was privy to that conversation, right? So she had the only trump cards to play against Tony that were possible. And I think if she makes it to the end, I think Tony can still eke out a victory, but I think I would have been at peace with her winning this game as well. She is astounding. And the one thing I didn't want to hear anybody say, and I was so happy that it didn't happen, or I haven't seen it yet, was that Ben was giving her something. No, she earned that. Ben laid down because he trusted her, because he supported her, because he had a real relationship with Sarah. And the fact that she can garner those relationships, she showed it her second time playing as well. there are a few players in the history of this game that can repeatedly have people feel like, and not in a false way, not in a big showy, lying, deceitful way, but have a real honest connection with her and really build trust so that they understand that anything she does, she's doing in the game, but she really has you outside of the game. I got you. We're friends. This is real. And she's a master at that.
Hear to everything you said. I know Kenny was saying the same thing. That's really well said. And I mean, as you know, Scott, you learned we had a draft at the merge, RJ, Kenny, and I, and we all had the women the first 5 draft picks. We all felt like a woman was primed to win this season, and Sarah felt like the best. I feel like she probably had a real chance to win this if she could have gotten there. So it's time for another woman champion. I mean, we've talked about Kim, Sophie being one of my favorites. You know, we know that the game is there. So hopefully they can move through some of the gender politics that exist on the show.
If I can ask Scott, because I know Scott has a very quick, I think he has a good recall memory for players from the game, but do you see female contestants in previous seasons who you would compare to Tony? Because we know that Sarah and Tony play a very different game. They're those successful, but can you think of, I'm trying to think of someone who's like, there's a female player who does sort of play as hard or in that same sort of way as Tony. Can you think of anyone in that realm? I mean, obviously I'm putting you on the spot. I also can't do it.
I mean, it plays the same kind of like cutthroat, like aggressive way. I mean, like Michaela did, and people called Michaela out for it. You know, she plays like an athlete, right? She plays like, you know, she played sports. She is super competitive, right? And she doesn't play exactly like Tony. Not as I hesitate to call Tony manipulative. I think he's just wacky. I think Tony's his own thing, but I think all you have to do is look across the aisle and say, look at Parvati. Look at the what people say about Parvati's gameplay, right? As opposed to like what they would say about a guy. Like, oh, she's just using her feminine wiles. Oh, people don't say the first thing out is that Parv is like a smart, savvy player. People wanted to label her as a flirt and just being that, you know, like it was so weird to hear the way that people talked about her. And then when you have aggressive players like Michaela, you see her get branded in a different way, you know? It's unfortunate. But this season, I really felt like we looked at Natalie and we went, and that's why I loved watching Natalie versus Ben. They had in those couple final tribals. There were endurance elements, right? And she's right with Ben, just crushing.
Absolutely.
Like I loved watching, you know, her on Edge. Like I think her one big mistake on Edge was isolating a bunch of people. You see the people that voted for her at the end, Parvati. She let Parvati in on all of her decisions, whether Parvati caught her finding the things that she was going to sell back into the game, but she wasn't including everybody. She wasn't as inclusive as maybe she should have been. She was isolating herself in a.
Was that a storyline to you during the show? I feel like that was almost new information to me. I didn't really glimpse that during the show. Did you?
No. It was. Parvati caught her, and after Parvati caught her the first time, it seemed like she felt like a little more open with Parvati, but she was hardcore. Like she was like the Terminator on Edge of Extinction. And I was noticing that as we went throughout. I don't think I was like going, oh, let me take note of this. She's not playing a very social game on Edge. But now I think maybe we know the game plan from when you come back from Edge. But I think what people can learn from Natalie going to Edge is that you need to play a strong social game on Edge.
Yeah.
You can't just be over there fighting for yourself, right?
Yeah.
It helped Chris that Chris went to Edge so late and then got back into the game, right? Natalie was there the whole time, which means there's a different element to how she needed to be treating everybody else. It seemed like she was winning everything and people were starting to get a little bit fed up with it, you know, and then she was not telling them every time. And people at the tribal were like, oh, whoa, you won all of those things? How come I never heard that you did that? I was on Edge with you for how long? And they didn't play that up in the Survivor edits, but I mean, hell, we didn't see reward challenges. I mean, I don't know if there were. I think this season was just chock full of stuff, so they couldn't play out every storyline. But yeah, I think I was taking notice of that early on, but I think that's one thing that they can learn from Natalie coming off of Edge is you've got to have a strong social game if you want to get that jury on your side at the end.
All right, well, we'll come to the last question I have for today, and then we'll continue this. RJ's proposed that we do some sort of rewatch of previous seasons and just do some rethinks, like the rewatchables of Survivor. So maybe we'll continue that for another day. But I want to ask you guys, I'll start with RJ. Where does Tony move into your pantheon of greats, and what is your, if you can think about this, top 5 players at the moment for you? Obviously, we'll let you change this in a year, but like this is where we are today.
I mean, I'm gonna add the stipulation that you don't have to be a winner to be in my top 5. Like I think that's a different discussion.
I like that.
I loved Yule's game. That was one of my favorite seasons, and I love the way that in that season they really harnessed the power as an alliance of a single immunity idol, and it really showed how much that can sort of carry some weight. And I love Yule's intellectual approach to the game. I love Kim. I think Kim is absolutely in my top 5. Scott, when you were talking about how Sandra's kind of fallen down for you in your power rankings or your sort of totem pole Survivor players, I think and again, this is just watching and enjoying the way they play. I'm willing to put Ozzy in my top 5 ahead of Sandra, just because Ozzy is kind of that, I'm just here to play in a very Tyson way. I have these unique talents that work really well. I love the way Andrea plays, and I think Andrea is maybe one of the most diverse players ever. Andrea is great in physical challenges. She's great socially. She's great in manipulating people. I think some people have like A+ games here and C games elsewhere. I think the lowest grade Andrea has in any capacity is like an A-. I think she's a very, very, very well-rounded player. And so if I've got those 4, I got to 4 very fast. And now, these recent seasons have been awesome, and watching them all together, and this season was a lot of fun. But I think if I'll put Tony there just because he won this season, and that's a really special thing. So that's my 5, and none of you can have any of them. So
doing a Survivor draft. All right, Scott, we'll turn it to you. I know you've thought about this, a lot. So who do you have currently in your top 5 Survivor contestants?
If we're saying favorite players, yeah, sure, maybe Ozzy's up there, but he never adapted. He never learned. And
Sure.
Going out there and like interviewing him for Game Changers, I just realized that this guy is he's never gonna grasp the politics of the game. Somebody who is like Ozzy that I think did, and I think we forget the insane way that Malcolm was voted out. I think Malcolm is probably on there for me as a player who's never won, but is a great player in the game. But Malcolm played at a time when the shift really happened to ride the big guys to the merge and then vote the big guys out right away. And it became this hyena game, which Tony, who's definitely in my top 5, has targeted and figured out. I don't know any way that you can't put Tony up there. I think if Parvati is not up against Yule in her first season, she's got a strong shot of winning that season. I think people forget just how good she was that year. Parv is probably up there for me. Boston Rob is up there for me. And I still think that there's so many great players. I don't know how to. Oh man, it's tough. Especially.
Are you willing to say today that Tony's the best Survivor player? I mean, would you go that far? I mean, you've
Yes.
seen.
Yeah. I think Tony's first win was almost flawless, and I think his second win was pretty flawless. I mean, he added elements his second time around, right? He did the Cochran thing, except for he didn't lose the first time out. Like it's insane to me, like that Tony's 2 wins are as immaculate as they were. And love him or don't love him, like the first way he played, I don't view him as Russell Hantz and light anymore. And I think that's how Kenneth views him, and how like a lot of the fan base still views him from that first time playing. But in that 5 spot, I mean, Sandra still, I think, has to be in there just because she's won twice, and that way of playing I just don't think she's at the top for me anymore. I think before this season, I was already, a little bit not understand, because Game Changers wasn't great for her either, right? So I think the more times you play, the more you're tarnished, right? I think if she stops after 2, she holds the top spot until Tony takes it from her now. But I think her quitting the game this time just shows me that all around play, she's not maybe even in the top 5, but all around play anymore. She's in that Sari category, who they are very great at specializing in the one thing. She's in the Ozzy category. He's great at the physical element of the game, but they're not all around players. And so somebody like Kim, I think, probably slides in my top 5 because she's an all around player. She's a physical threat. She's socially likable. She's so smart. She engineered that alliance that won her season, and she was untouchable, man. And so I think that's my top 5. I think that's it. And I love Yule. I love Yule as well. I mean, he's like my honorable mention.
But Kenny, before I go to you, I just want to ask Scott and RJ quickly. If Sarah, Natalie, or Michelle wins last night, do they become the greatest female player of Survivor? Do any or all of them supplant Sandra as the greatest female player of all time?
I think the only case is really for Sarah. And I think Michelle would have seen a sizable leap. I think the quality of this particular win for Natalie, fairly or unfairly, would have gone against her. I mean, it is the Chris Underwood effect. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you're cashing the $2 million check, you don't care how you got it. But
yes,
in the history books, people would look at it differently. But if Sarah pulls it off, especially because at that point, both of Sarah's wins would have featured casts of winners. I mean, she won Game Changers that was filled with all sorts of great players. I mean, Game Changers had Andrea and Ozzy, who I mentioned, and Sandra. I mean, so if she would have won 2 All-Star Game MVPs at that point, that's a very, very, very specific thing. So I think she's the only one really capable of riding that.
Scott, what do you think?
You know what? As much as I love Malcolm, you know what? Put Sarah in my top 5. I think Malcolm falls to honorable mention. It's just this crazy thing. Like, Malcolm is in a whole different. When I went down there and I talked to Jeff looked at me and he goes, "You would have a hard time winning this game. You would be voted out as soon as the merge happened if you were able to make it there." And now those big like people like Malcolm, like, they go home way earlier, which is, if we talk about the landscape of Survivor, I hate the early tribe swap because there's no consequence to anybody who gets rid of big players who could keep your tribe strong. This whole game is based on tribes becoming survival of the fittest and one for all for one after the merge. It's not that anymore. It's one for all for one from the jump. So people like that really don't have a place anymore, which I think really starts to highlight, like, a guy like Jeremy coming back a second time and actually winning when he suffered that fate the first time around, how great that was, how great Jeremy's gameplay was that game. But Sarah's right there, man. Because I look at someone like Michelle, and Michelle to me is also very good at 1.5 elements of the game. And she's missing that well-roundedness. But Sarah, man, she's shown herself to be good at everything. And I think she would probably deserve a spot in my top 5. So Yule and Malcolm are outside, waving, honorable mention style. That is like my biggest regret, is never seeing Malcolm go out with a triple idol reversal vote where he's the only guy that can get 1 vote. We talk about bad beats, right? Sari and him are 2 of, like, as a fan, 2 of the things I wish I wouldn't have witnessed. And I wish I would have been able to see Malcolm play more.
Yeah, I agree. I'll just quickly turn it over. I mean, Tony is the unbelievable performance on my thinking. And I think Sarah, even if she doesn't win, I think she might become the best. Her and Parvati, to me, are the 2 best female players. And with Kim, I think, even though Sandra is a 2-time champ, she's the queen. But, like, as far as total gameplay, I think you got to put Sarah, Parvati for me, and Kim. And Andrea's a nice call. I think Andrea's a nice honorable mention, like a good quality player. But we'll let the archivist and the #1 Survivor analyst put the last word on the top 5 here. Kenny, what do you got to say about where the rankings are? Favorites and top 5.
Well, I'll just do sort of a combination of both. I think that, From the first 10 years, I would pull Boston Rob. From the next 10 years, I would pull Tyson. From the third 10 years, I would pull Sarah. And from this watching last night, I would say Tony is the number one. And if for me, I think that Tony's win kind of proves for me that Russell Hantz was ahead of his time. And I think that he got two stinky juries. And I think that he should have potentially even been a two-time champion. And that's just my vote, though, it's just my vote. I don't think that there's any good justification for Natalie winning over him. And I'm fine with the way that Heroes versus Villains turned out. But I think that Russell did lay the groundwork for Tony. And I do think he laid the groundwork for a lot of players who failed miserably. And, the way that he was able to turn that stuff around, I understand also that he's almost like the game is 50-50, getting to the end and then making people want to give you $1 million. He's only 50% of the game. But I just think that Russell Hantz I'm putting him in there because he made for the best Survivor television in history until Tony came along. So I give respect to Russell because he respects the game more than as much as anybody else. And I do think that Russell Hantz is one of the best things to happen to Survivor. I think that he created excitement in the show again. I think he created a lot of interesting ways. Like I think you had to readjust the way that the game was played, Survivor and the people, because of seasons 19 and 20. He changed the game. He should have been on Game Changers. I mean, he changed the game for sure. So he's never won. He's kind of a wild card. We can see in season 22 that he stands almost no shot ever again because people just have this perception of Russell Hantz. But for me, he's in there. And kind of a random person that I would put as an honorable mention would be Rodney. I think that Rodney is one of the most entertaining people to ever be cast on Survivor. He almost got to the end. He didn't get to the end. I thought that he could have been Tony before Tony or after Tony, around Tony. I think he could have been another Tony. Rodney is a guy that was likable, good at a lot of different little things, and really was playing the season the hardest that season that he was in. I would like to see him come back and play again because we've seen a lot of players who were really fun for 1 year, like Cochran, and then it's like they would never have been considered like one of the all-time greats. They come back and win, and they're all there, And to unrelated on that, to chime in quickly on Sandra, I wouldn't even put her in my top 10. I don't think that. I don't know her first season that well. I haven't seen it in a long time.
Oh, it's so good.
I mean, that's something worth checking out. So I'm only going off of my top 10 based on the knowledge that I have, and having watched Heroes versus Villains twice in the last 6 months, she just didn't really. She would have been just Sandra, the silly player who fell down, and like everyone was saying, like she's just not that, but she got the votes, and that's great. But to me, it was just like in terms of, I think that my top 5, and she wouldn't be, I guess, in my top 2 or 3 women. Obviously, I think Sarah and Parvati would definitely be ahead of her. I'm not as big as a Kim fan as everybody else, but I think that that's what my thoughts are on that.
Well, I'm getting the high sign.
I think a lot of people want to see. Oh, I think a lot of people want to see Kim play one more time. I think she'd learn her lesson. I think she would really be able to prove herself if she played one more time. That's, I think, why she played a near flawless season, and then this time was caught in a rough situation, and she was the only one trying to make moves against Tony. And I think that shows me a lot about Kim's ability and her sense of the game. But there's a lot of great players who never win, and she was able to do it once. And then this time,
Speaking of the gender bias, the Survivor has had several seasons in the past where they've brought back 2 legends, like Russell and Boston Rob, or Ozzy and Coach. They'll do these seasons, but it's always men. And why not have a season where they bring back legends? Here's Sarah and Kim. You're going to be on one tribe with Sarah. You're going to be on one tribe with Kim. Let's see how that goes.
That's a great call.
Yeah,
I mean,
that'd
I
be
tried to get my friend Crystal on. She couldn't make it, but what if we do other discussions, we'd love to bring on some female voices to the show. But I'm getting the high sign from my wife saying, "Come watch the kids." This is what we do when we're sheltering in place.
Yep.
But we started this idea, at the merge because we wanted some stuff to talk about. I know. So it's been a lot of fun. I hope you guys have had as much fun as I've had talking about the show, and hopefully we can do it when the next Survivor comes back. But
For
I've learned
sure,
a lot
man.
from you guys. So, Scott, RJ, Kenny, great job. And congrats to all of us for getting a winner. Like RJ said at the beginning, someone I think that season 40 is really proud of to have represent them as a champion, Tony. So, anyway, guys, have a great day.
Thanks for having me, man.
Of course. Always a pleasure talking to all y'all, and we'll catch up on the social media.
Thank you.
All right, man.
That's good, guys.